Welcome to the Flower Essence Podcast, and join us on an exploration of the healing wisdom of flowers.
With combined decades of experience in the study and practice of flower essence therapy, I, Kathleen Aspens, and co-host Rokana Feld, guide you to reconnect to nature with these potent vibrational remedies. Welcome to the Flower Essence Podcast. I'm Kathleen Aspens, and I'm here with my co-host, Rokana Feld. Today, we are going to be talking about everybody's favorite thing, change. Is there anything more stressful than change? And yet, it's absolutely a constant. The environment that we live in is changing. The world that we live in is changing. Our lives are constantly changing. Our bodies are changing. Our relationships are changing. What can we do to help support ourselves to navigate these changes, because they're going to happen anyways, as gracefully as we possibly can? So, Ro, we had a bunch of ideas about different topics on change and different essences that can really help us with change. Is this your favorite topic or what?
Yes and no. It's that love-hate relationship.
Totally.
It really is a yes or no, a yes and no. I love change. I love changing when I'm in control.
Aha. Yes.
Aha.
It's all about the control,
Yes,
isn't it?
exactly. Changes that happen to me or crises or events can take a little more to deal with. But I do love the concept of being a catalyst for personal development and personal change just on this internal level, no matter what kind of change is happening, whether it's something that I'm attempting to change in my life or whether something happened that I need to deal with. So this is a really exciting episode to talk about all of these aspects and how the flower essences can help move us through that and get us to the other side.
Agreed. I think that it is one of those pieces that people come to, at least to my practice, more often when something in their life is changing, when something feels perhaps out of control, or when they've elected a change and yet it's really still very, very stressful and hard to deal with. I think flower essences are extraordinarily helpful to help us navigate these changes and to be supported during them because, change is always going to be happening. What can we do to go through with as few rope burns and skid marks as possible as we're dragged into these changes that happen to us?
Absolutely. So what are some of the first flower essences that you turn to?
Well, I always start by thinking through the Bach essences because they're just so foundational to the practice. And they're something that are nice and accessible. Most people can find them. And then we build on that. So the classic change essence is walnut. Dr. Bach made this essence from the English walnut tree. And it is, his terminology, I think, really works well. He called it the link breaker. Anytime you have changes going on, anytime you're moving or changing jobs or really anything that happens, I think you can be thinking walnut because it really, really helps you to shift an old pattern to help it release and then to start building a new pattern. So this could be for changing a habit. If you decide to start going to the gym, walnut is a good friend for you.
Absolutely. And I love that it's helpful in both. I see it as the way that the walnut tree grows and lives in its environment. It's protective for people going through change, sort of shielding the energy of it. And interestingly, it has some of those allelopathic growth, the juglones, as part of what the tree produces in that keep some of the some other saplings and plants from growing around it. Not all of them, but it has there's sort of an area that certain plants don't grow under the canopy of walnut trees. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's really it's sort of an interesting energetic in my opinion, because it feels that way sitting under a walnut tree. It feels protective and a little more like there's a clearing, and the bubble around one. And then the other interesting part of that plant signature is the nut meat inside the shell, which looks like a brain.
It does.
Yeah. When you think about walnut, as I think about it as an essence to help reprogram the brain, perfect for changing behaviors and attitudes. And that brain-like nut it's just so interesting that it has that signature.
It is interesting, and I think that piece of protection, I think, is a really valuable thing to remember when you're needing that protection from the walnut. Like you said, it projects its own space and doesn't allow other woody plants to grow underneath it, and that it also protects its nuts very carefully in these perfectly sealed shells where it protects the nut and the meat inside of that. So I think it is useful in that it helps to protect us as we go through change, as we're doing the reprogramming and the process of altering whatever patterns needed to be altered. I think one of the fun things that I've learned about walnut from studying the Persian walnut, this is the one that I've made. The English walnut, the Juglans regia, is actually nothing English about it really, other than its name. It's actually native to sort of Mediterranean regions. When I went to look up the species of the wild one, which I've made, it's very, very similar. It's still a Juglans regia, but it has a variety. And the curious thing about the walnut is nobody really knows precisely where it's native to, because the Romans moved them around in as part of doing what the Romans did, where they built roads and they had a whole culture that they created, and they took walnuts kind of everywhere they went and planted them obviously for oil and for the food. So it's kind of interesting that the native range of the walnut is kind of unknown precisely as to where they're from.
That's really interesting. And if you think about it as in the terms of change, it's got like a changing, origin or changing identity and
Adaptability.
Right, sense of where it came from. That's really funny.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, I think that when another piece that I like to put into a formula when somebody's working through change are some of the environmental essences. I think the environmental essences can be very, very helpful for giving us sort of a framework, a lot like we're talking about the walnut, where you kind of create that bubble around you. The environmental essences can give you an energetic framework through which to create this new reality. I think of Glacier River, which is one of the Alaskan environmental essences, because it has this quality of just letting everything go that's no longer needed. You can just release it, and it helps just to kind of ungrip your hands and allow things to flow and allow it to flow through. And then you add essences on top of that to kind of fine tune the process. What do you think about?
Yeah, and I would imagine all of the watery environmental essences are great because of just going with the flow, right?
Oh, completely right. You're right, because anything with that water signature of any sort, water is the most inherently, well, maybe not more than air, but it's a very inherently movable element. It doesn't tend to stay put. I was looking at some of the other air elements too, and that's something that we think about when we're dealing with change. Sometimes those elements of air, and I think willow maybe is an interesting kind of merge between those two elements. So if you think about the willow tree, where they grow right near the water, they just absolutely love growing near water, but they are just this drapey tree that moves with the slightest breeze. So it kind of has that signature of going between water and air. What do you think?
Yeah, what I like about willow is with its flexibility and ability to help one go with the flow is that it's such an essence for self-care. It it helps with easing pain as far as trauma. So when things happen to us that we're not expecting or things trigger past traumas, that willow just sort of it's like a divining rod in the body helping to go get to that root cause of where that pain is coming from. It's very soothing, and with that watery energy, I always feel the presence of Guan Yin or the Bodhisattva of compassion or even the Virgin Mary, but all of those sort of ascended master energies that have to do with water and compassion really come through to me when I work with willow.
That's really interesting. I never thought about it in that sense, but I can really see what you're talking about because it does have that quality of stillness while the movement goes all around. You know, if you think about the way that Guan Yin is depicted, she's always on this cloud, this swirl, and I think that's kind of what her energy is. She sort of holds up above all of that swirling wild energy and really holds that quiet, compassionate place. And I think you're right that willow really has that energetic as well. So
Yeah.
that's really interesting. I think of willow because if you look at the sort of the polarities of the essence and the qualities of the essence, if we're looking at willow, we have, you know, extreme flexibility on one hand, and then the alternate polarity would be that rigidity and fixedness. And I think willow really will help you kind of move from that more fixedness and those fixed ideas about what you think that things are supposed to be and that things aren't going the way you're expecting. And it kind of helps you find a way of flowing with it. Yeah, I like that about willow.
Yeah. And interestingly, you know, the white willow is used in herbalism as an anodyne for pain relief. It's one of its constituents, salicylic acid, is what they derived aspirin from when they, you know, invented aspirin.
Back to the basics,
So
right?
back to pain. And I look at the flower essence as a way to get the information from the pain. Kind of, like I said, it finding where it is in the body, and then what is it? What is it telling you? So it's another level to work with.
I like that. That's interesting. The like that illuminating the origins of where you're holding, where you're stuck, where you're fixed, and helping to sort of create a little bit of more awareness, a little bit of a pop of light in there, so that you can see what you're doing, and then you can make the choice whether you want to change or not.
Absolutely.
What are some other essences that you think about when you're thinking about change?
You know what I really like? Just kind of a nice, simple helper in letting us just digest what's happening to us is fennel. So, again, talking about a flower that has herbal history, fennel, classically used for digestion, cramps, bloating, and excess air in the system. And the flower essence, it works on the level of helping us digest what's happening in life and changes with ease. So I like that it tells us to listen to our gut and accept what's going on. And then it also helps release the trapped energy from our physical body so that, and it kind of just letting that, whatever's stuck, letting it go. And which is very balancing as if we're going through any kind of shift in our life.
Nice. Yeah, I love to look at the fennel on the side of the road because if you the plants that grow in these damaged areas, which roadsides, you know, they get mowed, they've been trashed by having the process of constructing a road is kind of inherently damaging to the land, right? I mean, it's necessary, but it's what happens. And the plants that come in to heal that, the plants that are sort of these undiscovered heroes, unappreciated heroes that come in and kind of like, I can take that soil that's been really damaged and trashed and probably has all sorts of toxins from the things that come off the road. But things like fennel are totally capable of that. And so that there's that quality of resilience and flexibility that the fennel brings energetically.
Yeah, the plants that like to grow in disturbed areas are some of my favorite flower essences. They all have such a personality and so much strength. And roadside fennel is roadside fennel, Queen Anne's lace, poison hemlock, dandelion. The list goes on. These are all pretty big personalities in the plant world.
You get into teasels and milk thistle and all of these other plants that are really not respected plants, but they have some interesting qualities if we looked at them. If we really kind of recognized what they're bringing to it, and if we saw them as, if you look at them from the ecological basis of when things have been disturbed, when things have been damaged, what comes in to help heal that, what can grow in that space. And these can be really great plant allies for us.
Absolutely. And, if they're growing along the road, they're obviously resilient to changes that are happening in their environment.
Yep. so
it's a great lesson.
Isn't it though? And we could just drive past and go, hey, there you are again. There you are helping me deal with the changes that are going on.
Right, right.
And I think that this might be a place where we could sort of diverge in this conversation about change, where we were talking about there's lots of different types of changes. The intentional changes, the things that we decide to embark on, those can be stressful, but perhaps they're less stressful somehow than the changes that happen to us. These sorts of crises or whether they're fast moving or slow moving crises in our life. But I think that those are two very, very different wings of this whole topic. And we could probably kind of dive in. Should we dive into the intentional change one first? Because that's a little easier to think about.
Yeah, and we already started it in a way with walnut, I think, with reprogramming and establishing new patterns.
Right. That's the perfect going back to school essence, right? Yeah. Walnut is a great starting point, especially for these types of changes, because you are breaking a pattern, you are breaking a habit. So instead of in the morning you're going to this one location, you'll be going to a different location, and the time will have changed, and your schedule will have changed, and all of these different elements will have changed. I think that, gosh, there's just so many interesting essences. I'd like to talk about sweet pea a little bit, because sweet pea, the one I use, is from the Flower Essence Society, and it can help you when you've gone through a significant change, such as moving, or essentially you're joining a new community. You've left your old community behind, and you need to recreate or create a community of people. I even see that the environment around you, the plants around you, are part of your new community as well. But sweet pea helps you connect in with your new allies and people, whether they're human or green, and to help you feel more at home. Because I think that's one of the most challenging parts of change, aside from just the details of, remembering to get where you need to go and adjusting your schedule, but to feel like you really belong. Do you think that's one of the things that comes up for your clients a lot?
Yeah, I haven't really worked with the sweet pea, though, the FES sweet pea. So that's really interesting. And I've been noticing it a lot lately, growing around me. And it's another one that grows all over the sides of the road, along with vetch. They're very similar. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately. So it's interesting that you bring that up with home and community. I like that a lot.
One of the qualities I think that's interesting in this topic is the color. All of the sweet peas have that kind of remarkable magenta color, at least the wild ones in California do. Of course, there are cultivated ones and all sorts of crazy colors, but the Flower Essence Society made the magenta one that grows wild on our roadsides here in California. And that color magenta is really wonderful for repatterning, much in the way that if you look at all these different essences that carry that quality, that carry that color in their flower, are about that repatterning process into a new framework, into a new field, whether it's repatterning the heart after a heartbreak, whether it's repatterning the body after an injury. And this one is like repatterning your community.
I love it. The magenta color definitely is a catalyzing color. Yeah. I also like the California aster because it helps push through your own boundaries and limitations, or what your own, or if they're created by others, created by you or created by others. It likes to move through boundaries, and it helps with transitions in life.
The asters are an interesting topic in and of themselves. I don't know if you have worked with David Dalton's aster series. His aster series was sort of my first introduction to the asters as essences. And since then, I've made an aster essence myself. And, in his Delta Gardens, his series of asters are all about all these different kinds of changes, but specifically losses, specifically kind of transition, like life transition and, moving to the other side of the veil. And I think that it's interesting that the asters, because where they come in the season, when they bloom in the late part of the season, in the fall, early winter, it is working into that whole premise of things are falling away. This is the very end, and things are moving on. And I think that you're right that the aster itself has this quality of helping you let go of something and be able to move past and move forward. And I think especially have that place of really that deep appreciation and gratitude for what has been. Like when we lose a loved one, if we can connect into that loss, in that just that longing and that delight in loving and caring about that person, even though it's sad that they've gone.
Yeah, I did work with David's asters and learned about that. It's sort of what spurred me to create the California wild aster that was growing along a field that I found, and I had visited it over the course of 3 years and noticed how it would cross the fence boundaries, which is sort of where I got that, that impression that it likes to push through boundaries. It was really, really interesting. But you're right. It grows in the fall when most other things are starting to deteriorate or die. It's one of the latest blooming of the flowers, I believe. And so that's a really interesting concept. And it's such a sweet family, flower in the daisy family. The California aster is a sort of a lavender color. So it's like this gentle support to grow during changes that may deal with death and decline, but just healthily letting go what no longer serves and what has changed.
Yeah. I made a Chinese species of aster that I call lavender aster, because one of the fun and entertaining parts about the aster family is how hard they are to pin down botanically. They cross all the time, and so a pure aster species is pretty unrealistic because they're just constantly doing whatever, all sorts of different things. It makes botanists go crazy trying to pin down a precision of the species. So I made one that's a lavender color of some sort of aster that's native to China. And I think the biggest piece that I'm taking from it is that quality of that celebration of graduation. When you go to a graduation ceremony, if you think about it, it's a ceremony, it's this passage, it's a celebratory occasion, but you're not going back to how it was before. You don't just go right back to your dorm or whatever your life was like, going to school, going to class. Things are changing, and all these people that are together now are going to be dispersed to the four winds. So it has that, I think the Aster, the one that I've worked with, it has that quality of remembering the celebration of you came to this place and now everything is going to be different. What was comfortable, what was fun, what was growthful, all of these things. Now it's time to let that go and let the new thing be born. And you can't go back.
Yeah, that's a neat perspective about all of the different asters.
Yeah.
They have their sort of very subtle differences, but they kind of all work on the same overall issues.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at flower essences in sort of that larger view of where the plant families and kind of what ecologically they do, all similar, and then there's like lots of little details that are very specific and different in them.
Right, just little subtle twists on the overall energy. Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting to really tune into a client and find out like where are they? Which piece of this are they needing right at this moment?
Yeah. Well, there's one other that I like when dealing with attempting to consciously make changes in one's life. And it's California valerian, which I've mentioned before I believe in our stress episode. And in this context, however, it really seems to help us remember that we can choose our reality, that whatever's happening, we're creating, and we can create the reality that we choose. I look at it, it's not, valerian sort of works on the dreamscape in general, the herb as well. But in a dream, when you know you're dreaming, for example, if you've ever had a lucid dream or have heard about that, it's when you're aware and conscious in a dream, and you can choose to change what's happening in that dream. And so valerian helps us remember that we can do that in our waking dream as well as our sleeping dreams. And part of that is allowing us to know that we can detach from what we're holding on to tightly. So great essence for when it's a change that you want to make, helping us to let go of anything holding us back or that we're holding on, and that from moment to moment, we can design our future.
Yeah, that's really appropriate to. I love to have essences that have that quality in a formula because it really helps to sort of set your eye. This is where you're heading. This is, rather than being so wrapped up in what we all do from time to time is what we lost, what we missed, and instead, okay, this is where we're going. This is our intention. This is what we're trying to create. So with these types of change, it's great to kind of address both parts, the part behind and then the part in front as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that honeysuckle is one that I might think about also for the that back side of the process of helping you to release what was and sort of that sweetness of what used to be, and instead you can kind of turn your head towards the future and towards moving forward rather than being constantly kind of recycling and going through what used to be, what I miss, what I used to have, all of these things, what my life used to be like. Honeysuckle, Dr. Bach made one, and there's a few other around that are all kind of interesting essences for helping to release that. I made one called Morrow's Honeysuckle, which is the piece like that I really pick off of the Morrow's that's a little different than Dr. Bach's is that it's really helpful for kind of when you're kind of gripping onto the old things that really served you, and it's time to let go of that crutch or that pattern or that object that you have because it's no longer serving you and it's kind of holding you back.
Nice. Is that one of the Flora of Asia flower essences?
Yes. Yeah. The Morrow's honeysuckle.
Yeah. So shall we talk about when change happens to us that we weren't wanting or weren't expecting, any kind of crisis or loss scenario?
No kidding. Boy, it's just these sorts of changes just sort of come up and blindside you. And, sometimes they're slow moving and sometimes they're just all it takes is a phone call or a text or a Facebook post. I don't know about you. I've seen some of those that like everything changed after I saw that happened. I think that, the first one I think about is tidal forces, which is one of the Alaskan environmental essences. It's so helpful for really releasing all what's existing now. Just let it go, because what will come back might be different or it might be similar, but you just really, there's no way you can hold back the tide is coming through and it's going to change this thing, and you just have to go, okay, I just trust that what I really need will be delivered. I think that the tidal forces essence creates this container for when you're just being swamped.
Yeah, what a what a great way to put it, being swamped.
Yeah.
I have this mental image of, just a big wall of tide of the ocean just coming at you or taking you by surprise, as it happens on the California coast a lot. The sleeper
The sneaker waves.
Sneaker waves or sleeper waves. Yeah, both.
Yeah, either way.
But yeah, they're it's a dangerous situation, and we need all the support we can get. So that's a great one, as well as the fireweed and the fireweed combo from Alaskan Essences. As I think we also mentioned that one before, and it's just definitely one of my favorites for getting through that sort of rough patch where you've just been overwhelmed with change.
Yeah. The fireweed that I love for these emotional changes, say you have a loss, of a loved one or something that was just very dear to you, and the river beauty is a type of fireweed. It's a certain fireweed that grows alongside rivers and creeks, and it's one that really helps with that emotional component of the change, that when you feel that sort of the just the profound loss that gets stuck in the emotions. That's the one that I think about for this kind of change, this change that happens to us, the loss of a family member or whatever it might be. The river beauty helps you rebuild from it after you've just had this really just deep and profound loss.
Absolutely. And also not just for, I mean, this can also go back and be used for, intentional change. I remember using it a lot when I moved, the last time I moved house, which was, it was emotional and very stressful. And there was a definite sense of loss for missing the property that I was moving away from, the plants and the trees that I had worked with for 3 years, making flower essences. And it was pretty tough. The fireweed combo was one that really got me through it.
Yeah. These sorts of changes, we see ourselves as being kind of easily moved around. We get in cars, we get in planes, we get in all these things. But there's a part of us that's really attached and connected and rooted to where we live. Whether that's a home, whether that's a piece of land, or, whether it's ancestral or just where we happen to be living right now. And I think it's really underestimated how much change it is to move, how much change it is, even though our culture and our technology allows us to go, all across the world, we're missing some parts of ourselves if we don't sort of respect and come back to this place that we actually live and reconnect to where we belong. And then when we move, we have to attach ourselves to that new place in the world.
Right. And that fireweed is all about strengthening that grounding connection. So it's perfect for that kind of scenario.
Yeah. And I think that the trees can be really helpful in that relocation process. Any of the trees are really useful. I usually think of the Japanese alder, which is one of my Flora of Asia essences, because the alders are really, really good at being the the boundary pushers and the ones that come in first after some big changes have taken place. They're pioneer species in an ecological process of restoring and rebuilding the plant life of any particular area. So you'll often see them alongside streams and creeks, and they can just they can drop in and grow where there are no other canopies. There are no other trees around. They can be their own protection, and they strike out into these new areas, and they create circumstances that other plants can grow in really well. So I think of the Japanese alder with these sorts of changes. When you move, you need to strike down new roots and really set in, and it can help you adapt to those changes.
That's really neat. Do you know if that's something that all the alders do, or is that more specific to the Japanese?
I think that it's probably part of all the alders. They all have the same purpose in all the ecosystems in which they grow. If you look at the alder bark, I'm pretty sure that most, if not all, alders will have that white color to the bark, that light colored bark. And part of what that does for the plant is it's a natural sunscreen. The alders don't get sunburned like some other trees need sun protection when they're growing out on their own, and there's no shade, and so the light hits them on all sides. If you look at a forest, these plants are all growing up one and amongst each other, and they have protection from direct sunlight until they get up to the very top. But something like an alder or a birch grows out all alone. It's perfectly fine growing out all alone because it's built-in sunscreen.
Wow. I love learning that. That's so cool.
Plants are awesome.
I did not know that. That's pretty neat. And it's another sort of signature about it being protected while it's growing and changing and transitioning from a young plant to a big tree. Exactly. So I like that a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that one of the other essences that I think about with these sorts of big changes that take place, and especially with the kind of the undesirable changes, the hairy butterwort, which is one of the Alaskan essences, and you just have to say it and everybody kind of giggles a little bit. But the hairy butterwort is very helpful for helping you go through a change without creating a secondary crisis. A lot of times when we go through change, we maybe don't quite listen as much to our own selves, like when we need to rest, or instead we kind of get fixed on we have to do all the things or maintain a schedule, and aren't quite flexible enough to realize, I really do need to take this time off in order to reroute and relax a little bit. And so hairy butterwort can kind of help you to connect to that quality of change without creating crisis, without creating another problem.
That's great. I haven't not worked with hairy butterwort, but this is so funny. I'll just tell you. If you ever dream about flowers in the middle of, you just wake up and the name of the plant comes into your mind. It happens to me. So last night I woke up about 4. Hairy butterwort. It just popped into my head.
Wow. That's really interesting. Somebody wants to come say hi, I guess.
Yeah. It just happened a few weeks ago with the fairy lantern, and now it's happening with hairy butterwort. So I'll have to figure out what that means. But seeing it here today, talking about it, is hilarious.
That is funny. Wow, how interesting. Huh. Yeah, so that plant's definitely coming up. I mean, I think that's another way that we can look at working with essences too, like you're talking about. This, it's a plant that wants to come say hi. So sometimes plants come say hi to us when we're driving down the road and we see a whole stand of fennel blooming, or we see, a dandelion popping up through the crack, but they can also come to us in the dream state as well, right? As you're talking about, it's happening for you.
Absolutely. I was thinking it'd be like, you're a flower essence practitioner when, and then, we could have a list. Dreaming about plants. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What are some of the other ones for those crisis-like changes that you like to use?
Well, I think that it's really useful to not forget the heart in all of this. I think that whenever we go through these changes, we tend to kind of get the kind of the details of life hammered out. Okay, all right, this is my schedule. Okay, I need to be competent. And, all of those aspects of adulting are really useful. And then sometimes we can kind of forget to sort of tend our own hearts in these crises. We're too busy doing the things and maybe forgetting the piece that really is asking to be loved and cared for. I wouldn't forget to work with some of the roses in these contexts, because kind of soothing your heart and caring for your heart, even if you're really doing all of the things that you need to be doing. There's so many different rose essences. I could think of, 20 just off the top of my head. But I think that the one that I'm thinking of the most in this context is the Wilmot's rose, which is one of my Flora of Asia essences. And the Wilmot's rose has this beautiful, like grandmotherly quality, and it also has the magenta color. And so it's really good at sort of holding your hand and, sort of figuratively bringing you a cup of tea and a cookie, just sort of being that gentle presence of the ancestral wisdom of, I know you're having a really tough time, but it's going to be okay. I'm here to be here for you. So all the roses are so good at helping with your heart, but I think that's one that I'm just thinking of because it has that really soft, sweet quality, a little bit like the California wild rose. Have you worked with that one?
Oh, that's one of my favorites, absolutely, and I use it in so many formulas. A lot of the roses, I especially love the California wild rose, though, and also the sweetbriar rose, which is another wild rose here in California. It's not a native, though, and not liked by farmers and those who have livestock in their fields because it'll just pop up and be sort of invasive. So it's very similar, though, in its energy, and it looks very similar. It has a little smell of apples when you smell the
Yeah, it's the Rosa eglanterii, I think, something
exactly.
like that. Kind of close. I think that's a really cool rose. I just absolutely love the fragrance of the foliage. Really a neat rose. So I've never known that one as an essence. I've only known it sort of in real life.
Well, I've made it. And
how cool is that?
In fact, it was growing not far from the California wild aster. So how appropriate.
Interesting. Tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, well, I find that it helps. It's similar with the California wild rose. It helps with that sense of self, with heartbreak and anything that's sort of emotionally difficult to go through. Sweetbriar rose helps with the comforting, feeling comforted while that's happening, and then feeling calm and secure in the self.
Lovely.
So it's a great one for grief, for any kind of grief that's happening, as are all the roses, but I think that one in particular.
Yeah, I think that this topic of grief will be one that we have to sort of delve into, because I know that it's a big part of my practice. I've worked with I've had a lot of grief experiences in my life and work with it a lot with my clients, and I think that it would be a really lovely more expansion of a topic that we can talk about. But change has grief built into it, but I think there's lots of pieces that we can delve into more thoroughly. Is there one other essence or another essence that you really want to bring into this conversation about change?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would always look at Angelica for that feeling of being protected, guided, and cared for. And it's especially helpful in times of crisis and transition of any kind. The Archangelica, which is the European Angelica, but we also have a few here in coastal California that work as well, just for that purpose.
Yeah. It's such an important essence. I know I use it a lot. Just in so many cases, it's really appropriate and helpful for those cases of transition, whether you're transitioning, whatever sort of transition you're making, whether it's a big one or the big one. Angelica can be a really good companion along the way. And it's interesting, once again, we're starting to get into the air element, huh?
Yeah. And earth. it brings Angelica really brings that energy from the sky, from the angelic realm, divine energy, channels it down into the earth and out into the four directions.
Yeah. And herbally, you're using the root mostly, and so that's kind of an interesting quality, that the medicine is this so grounded. It's so intrinsic into that rooted earthy quality, and then the flower essence is really working on the more elevated realms of the quality of that plant, really helping you connect to the angelic realm, to the etheric realm, and helping you feel more. I think it's just sort of shielded and protected. Is that sort of a summary of the way that you think about the Angelica essence?
Yeah, I feel like I'm being watched over, when I take that essence, sort of like somebody, something, so has got my back and helping to sort of giving divine guidance.
Hmm. I think we could all use more of that.
Absolutely.
So beautiful. I think that this is a good start on this topic. I think that each and every individual has qualities and characteristics of where they're at and where they're headed and what's happening with them. That's why we really love to tune formulas very specifically for the individual. But I think this is kind of a good overview of the topic of change and some of the essences that we love to use with it.
Absolutely. I mean, just really, we've hit a few points that are sort of that could go deeper, that we're touching the surface on. Change is part of everything that we do, everything that happens, and then especially the clients that come to us are all dealing with some sort. I mean, there's change, either whether they're dealing with change or they want to make a change in their life. So it's woven like a thread throughout what may be a different issue or a crisis, or just something seemingly unrelated. It weaves itself through that, and some of these essences are great to incorporate with other essences that are specific to what that person is going through.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks so much to our plant allies and our flower essence friends. And I think that we've covered quite a lot of ground here, and I feel really good. And I think that we can move on to our next topic, to our next episode. And it's been really great spending time with you here.
Yeah, it is always great talking about plants. Maybe I'll have another dream for the next one.
Well, please, I need to hear about it. All right, until next time.
You've been listening to the Flower Essence Podcast with Urkana Feld and Kathleen Aspens, and we appreciate your interest in connecting with nature on a deeper level. You can find us online at thefloweressencepodcast.com or join us on Facebook and continue the discussion.
This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only. We are not physicians and do not diagnose, prescribe, or treat medical conditions. Please consult with your own physician or healthcare practitioner regarding the suggestions and recommendations made by the hosts and guests of the Flower Essence Podcast.